James Garner entered the world as James Scott Bumgarner on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. Raised in a small town through the Great Depression, he developed both a sturdy work ethic and a grounded, approachable nature. His early years were tough. His mother died when he was just 5. His father, Weldon Bumgarner, struggled to keep the family steady. James spent stretches of his childhood living with relatives and taking whatever odd jobs he could find. Those hardships forged a quiet resilience and a deep well of empathy, qualities that later became a signature of his screen presence. Before acting ever crossed his mind, Garner wore a uniform. At 16, he left school, joined the Merchant Marine, and later served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War, where he was awarded 2 Purple Hearts for bravery. The discipline and courage he showed in combat translated naturally to a career playing principled men who did the right thing, even when it cost them. He carried physical and emotional scars from the war, but also a humility and refusal to glamorize heroics, traits that set him apart from many leading men of his era. Garner's path into acting was almost accidental. After returning to Los Angeles, he tried a series of jobs, including print modeling. While helping a friend with a role, a talent agent noticed his striking looks, unflappable demeanor, and natural charm. Small parts in film and television followed, on-the-job training rather than formal classes. His big break arrived in 1957 with Brett Maverick on the hit series Maverick. The show's breezy mix of humor, adventure, and Western style made him an instant star. Unlike the standard Western tough guy, Garner's Maverick was quick with a quip, slow to fight, and altogether relatable, very much in tune with who Garner was off-screen. By the 1960s, he'd become one of Hollywood's most reliable draws, moving easily into features. He sparred and sparkled with Doris Day in The Thrill of It All, 1963, and Move Over, Darling, 1963, and held his own alongside Steve McQueen in The Great Escape, 1963. Audiences connected with his laid-back charm. Critics appreciated the subtle emotional life he brought to his roles. Colleagues called him a gentleman, professional, kind, and blessedly free of ego. In the 1970s, he reinvented the small-screen hero with the Rockford Files. As Jim Rockford, he preferred wit and persuasion over fists and gunfire. The role earned him an Emmy in 1977 and a lifelong fan base. The work was punishing. Garner performed many of his own stunts and paid for it with injuries that lingered, but his professionalism never faltered. Even with chronic back pain and fatigue, he almost never missed a day. Later, he kept showing new colors. In Murphy's Romance, 1985, he earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, and in The Notebook, 2004, he moved a new generation with a tender portrait of a devoted husband. He also returned for warmly received Maverick and Rockford Files reunion movies, proof that his star power didn't fade. Off-camera, he championed actors' rights, speaking against unfair studio practices and pushing for creative freedom. Garner's personal life mirrored the warmth and steadiness people loved on screen. He married once and for life to Lois Josephine Fleischman Clark on August 17, 1956, after just 16 days of courtship. He liked to joke that he spent 70 summers on the honeymoon, and it about broke me. With typical dry humor, he quipped, "Marriage is like the army. Everyone complains, but you'd be surprised at the large number of people who re-enlist." Beneath the joke was a clear sense of commitment and perseverance, traits both he and Lois shared. Lois was Jewish, and while Garner was never rigid about religion, he embraced the peace and balance her faith brought to their home. She had a daughter, Kim, who was 9 and recovering from polio when they married. Garner became a patient, caring stepfather. In 1958, they welcomed their daughter Greta Gigi Garner, born January 4, 1958. He adored his daughters and spoke of them with pride and tenderness. Their marriage lasted nearly 58 years, a rarity in Hollywood. They did weather 2 separations, 3 months in 1970 and another in 1979, but they reconciled in September 1981, reaffirming what both called an unbroken bond. "We just needed a little distance," he said, "but we always found our way back." Friendly, modest, and famously conflict-averse, Garner seldom criticized colleagues. That's why his candid reflections on Randolph Scott got attention. People thought they knew him because of his screen image, Garner said, but the real man was something else entirely. By the time Garner was starting out, Scott was already a legend of the Western. Garner admired him, the dignity, the quiet presence, the sense that he knew exactly who he was. Scott didn't need to bark orders or wave his arms to command a room. The power was in his stillness. To Garner, Scott stood for an older ideal of masculinity, fewer words, more integrity. But he also noted that Scott's intense privacy created a mystique. He kept his private life locked away, Garner recalled. You could work with him for months and still not feel like you truly knew him. Rumors filled the void, but Garner brushed most of them off. Scott didn't play the publicity game, and people invented stories because he gave them nothing to chew on. On set, Scott was the definition of professional, on time, lines learned, respectful of everyone. That may sound simple, Garner said, but in Hollywood, that kind of consistency is rare. He chalked it up to Scott's Southern upbringing, manners, discipline, and quiet honor. Even disagreements were handled with courtesy. Scott's legacy, in Garner's eyes, reached beyond Westerns. He embodied the leading man as strong, dependable, and principled, traits audiences trust. Many actors, Garner included, tried to measure up to that standard, whether they realized it or not. If Scott seemed emotionally reserved, Garner didn't consider it a flaw. It was part of his authenticity. He didn't pretend to be open just to please people. He was who he was, and I respected that. Garner's summation came down to a single word: steadfast. Scott didn't chase trends or bend to pressure. He lived by a personal code and never wavered. Coming from Garner, himself renowned for integrity, that judgment carried real weight. His portrait of Scott revealed the man behind the stoic cowboy, disciplined, dignified, and deeper than his public image suggested. James Garner died on July 19, 2014, at 86, heartbreakingly close to what would have been his and Lois's 58th anniversary. Married in 1956, after just 2 weeks of dating, they proved that sometimes people simply know. Friends said he was utterly devoted to her, the tough, easygoing screen star turning gentle and fiercely loyal at home. As his health declined, Lois cared for him quietly at their Brentwood house, guarding his privacy with grace. Lois lived another 7 years after his passing, but those close to her said the silence he left behind never truly lifted. Their life together spanned every chapter of his career, from Maverick and the Rockford Files to his film triumphs. She didn't seek the spotlight, but those who knew them insist she was his anchor, the steady counterbalance to his occasional fire, and a cornerstone of why their marriage worked so well.